New Haven City buzzed with life, a place where humans and aliens walked the streets together. The Arvani had been on Earth for 20 years now, their shimmering silver skin and glowing eyes no longer a rare sight. Some worked in government, some in science, and others simply tried to blend in. Joran had never cared much about them. He was just a mechanic, fixing old hoverbikes and transport pods to pay his rent. The Arvani lived in their own world, and he lived in his. That was how he liked it. Tonight, he just wanted to grab a meal and go home. The market square was crowded, full of street vendors selling everything from grilled meat skewers to neon-lit gadgets. As he turned a corner, someone rushed past him, and his hand brushed against something cool and metallic. A soft gasp stopped him in his tracks. He turned to see an Arvani woman staring at him in shock, her violet eyes wide. She lifted her wrist, and his gaze fell to a sleek silver bracelet that glowed faintly where he had touched it. "You touched it," she whispered, her voice shaking. Joran frowned. "Yeah? Sorry about that."
She took a step back. "No."
"You don't understand." She looked around, almost as if she was afraid. That was a claiming band. Joran blinked. "A what?" She pressed her lips together before taking a deep breath. "In my species, this band is sacred. It only activates when touched by a chosen mate." A cold feeling crept up Joran's spine. "Hold on. You're saying that because I touched it. It means you have claimed me," she said, voice barely above a whisper. Joran stared at her, trying to process what she had just said. "That's ridiculous. It wasn't accident." She swallowed hard. "Accident or not, the bond is sealed." His mouth went dry. "You're joking, right?" Her expression told him she wasn't. Joran rubbed his temples. This was not happening. He was just a guy trying to live his life. And now this? "What does that even mean?" he asked, frustration creeping into his voice. She hesitated. "It means that, according to my people's laws, you are my only mate. Forever." The words hit like a punch to the gut. Joran ran a hand through his messy brown hair, letting out a slow breath. "Well, damn." Joran sat across from the Arvani woman at a small cafe, his hands wrapped around a cup of black coffee. He needed something strong to process what had just happened. Across from him, the woman, Celia, as she had introduced herself, was still pale, her violet eyes flickering with distress. "So," he said slowly, trying to keep his voice calm, "you're telling me that because I accidentally touched your bracelet, we're what? Married?" Celia flinched slightly. "Not quite. The Arvani do not marry in the way humans do. But the claiming band is sacred. It binds us. For life." Joran let out a low whistle. "And there's no way to undo it?" She hesitated, fingers lightly tracing the smooth surface of the band on her wrist. "Only if you willingly reject me." He sat up straighter. "Okay, great. Then I reject you. No offense, but we don't even know each other." Celia inhaled sharply and looked away. "It is not that simple." "Of course it's not," Joran muttered. "What happens if I reject you?" Her hands clenched in her lap. "The rejection will sever the bond, but it will harm me."
"Deeply?"
Joran frowned. "Harm you how?" "Our species does not form attachments lightly. We only have one mate in a lifetime. If that bond is broken, the emotional and physical toll is severe." Joran stared at her, his stomach sinking. "You mean it could kill you?" Celia hesitated before nodding. "It has happened before." Joran let out a slow breath and ran a hand through his hair. This was insane. He had gone from a normal day to suddenly holding someone's life in his hands. He could walk away, pretend this never happened. But if what she said was true, doing so would destroy her. He looked at her, really looked at her. The way her silver skin caught the dim glow of the cafe lights, the way her violet eyes were filled with both strength and fear. She wasn't just some alien with strange customs. She was a person. Joran exhaled. "Okay. Look, I don't know anything about Arvani bonds, but I do know that I don't want to be the guy who ruins your life." Her eyes flickered with surprise. "You will not reject me?" Joran sighed. "Not yet. I mean, we barely know each other. If we're stuck with this, we might as well figure out how to deal with it first, right?" Celia blinked at him, her lips parting slightly. You are different from what I expected. Joran smirked. I get that a lot. For the first time that night, something in her expression softened. Outside, the city lights flickered, and people went about their lives, unaware that Joran's had just taken a turn he never could have seen coming. Days turned into weeks, and what had started as an accident became something neither of them could ignore. Celia moved into Joran's apartment, not because she wanted to, but because Arvani society had strict customs about bonded mates living apart. If she stayed alone, there would be questions, suspicion. Joran had begrudgingly agreed, though he wasn't thrilled about suddenly having a roommate. At first, it was awkward. Celia was quiet, reserved, always watching him like she was trying to figure him out. Joran, on the other hand, was used to his space, his routine. Having someone else in his home, especially in Arvani, was strange. But slowly things changed. One evening, Joran was in the garage, working on an old hoverbike when Celia wandered in. She leaned against the doorway, watching as he tightened a bolt with careful precision. You fix machines, she said, more to herself than to him. Yeah, Joran replied without looking up. Been doing it since I was a kid. Celia stepped closer, tilting her head. Humans rely so much on their hands. Arvani use our minds more. Our technology is built with thought, not tools. Joran chuckled. Yeah? Well, let's see you fix this engine with just your thoughts. She gave him a rare smile. I believe that would be cheating. He smirked. Exactly. She knelt beside him, curious now. Show me how it works. Joran hesitated. You serious? She nodded. With a shrug, he handed her a wrench. All right. This bolt here, it's loose. You tighten it like this. Celia took the tool, her fingers brushing his as she mimicked his movements. She struggled at first, and used to the effort it required. It is more difficult than I expected, she admitted. Yeah, well, fixing things isn't easy, Joran said. Takes patience. She glanced at him then, something unreadable in her gaze. You have patience? He smirked. Only with machines? Celia laughed softly, the sound catching him off guard. It was the first time he'd heard her truly laugh, and something about it made his chest tighten. After that, their conversations became easier. They started eating meals together, talking about their worlds. Joran learned that Celia was a researcher, fascinated by human culture. She had spent years studying their history, their customs, their emotions. But books and studies can only teach so much, she admitted one night as they sat on the small balcony outside his apartment. Living among humans is different. Joran took a sip of his drink. Yeah? What's the biggest difference? Celia hesitated. The way you feel. Humans aren't intense. You experience emotions deeply. Love, anger, joy. Arvani are more controlled, but I see now that control does not mean absence. Joran raised an eyebrow. You saying we're too emotional? She shook her head.
No.
I think it is beautiful. Joran wasn't sure why, but the way she said it made his heartbeat quicken. He looked at her, the soft glow of the city lights reflecting in her violet eyes. Celia, he said slowly, do you think we could ever be more than just an accident? She met his gaze, her lips parting slightly in surprise. I don't know, she admitted. But I think I want to find out. Joran reached for her hand, resting his fingers lightly over hers. She didn't pull away. And for the first time since this all began, it didn't feel like a mistake. It felt like the start of something real. Things between Joran and Celia had settled into an unexpected rhythm. Their bond, once an accident, was slowly becoming something else. Something real. But peace never lasted long. One evening, Joran was fixing a transport pod in the garage when the front door slammed open. Celia. Joran stood up, wiping his hands on a rag. A tall Arvani male stood in the doorway, silver skin gleaming under the dim light. His violet eyes burned with fury, his posture rigid with authority. He wore a deep blue ceremonial sash across his chest, something Joran had never seen before. Celia stepped out of the kitchen, her expression shifting from shock to dread. Ryzen, Joran glanced between them. You know this guy? Ryzen's gaze snapped to him, full of barely restrained rage. I should ask you the same, human. Why are you in her home? Joran folded his arms. Last I checked, this is my home. Ryzen's eyes darkened. Celia, tell me this is a mistake. She swallowed hard. I cannot. Ryzen's expression twisted.
No.
You were meant to be mine. Joran tensed. Meant to be. Celia let out a shaky breath. Before I came to Earth, my family arranged a potential union between us. It was never finalized, but Ryzen challenged for my bond. Joran clenched his jaw. Challenged? Ryzen stepped forward, his voice sharp. The Arvani have traditions, human. If more than one suitor desires a bond, they must compete. I made my claim before you, but you stole what was rightfully mine. Joran scoffed. Yeah, well, I didn't exactly mean to. It was an accident. That does not change the law, Ryzen snarled. I can still challenge you for her. Celia's breath caught.
No, Ryzen.
It is too late. The bond has already been formed. Ryzen's expression turned cold. Then let us see if your human is strong enough to keep it. Joran narrowed his eyes. You want to fight? Ryzen smirked. A duel of honor. If you refuse, it proves you are unworthy, and I will take Celia as my own. Joran glanced at Celia. She looked terrified. If I fight him, Joran asked, what happens if I win? Celia's voice was barely above a whisper. Then the bond will be truly yours. No one can challenge it again. Joran turned back to Ryzen, sizing him up. The guy was taller, stronger. Probably faster, too. But Joran had something else, sheer stubbornness. You want a challenge? Joran said coolly.
Fine.
Let's do this. Celia grabbed his arm. Joran, you don't have to. But he wasn't backing down now. Because this wasn't just about the bond anymore. This was about her. The duel was set for the next evening in the Arvani Arena, a sleek, circular structure deep in the city, hidden from human eyes. Joran hadn't been sure what to expect, but when he arrived, he realized just how serious this was. Dozens of Arvani stood around the perimeter, their silver skin glowing faintly under the arena lights. There was no cheering, no unnecessary noise, just silent, watchful gazes. At the center of it all stood Ryzen, his expression smug and confident. He had changed into light combat armor, the dark material hugging his broad frame. Meanwhile, Joran stood there in his usual work clothes, a simple undershirt and cargo pants. This seems a little unfair, Joran muttered to Celia, who stood beside him. She looked pale, anxious. You do not have to do this. Joran smirked. What? And let that guy claim you like you're some kind of prize. Not happening. Celia's lips parted slightly, but before she could respond, an Arvani elder stepped forward. The challenge has been accepted, the elder announced. This is a duel of honor. Strength, skill, and will shall determine the victor. His gaze flickered between the two. The fight ends when one yields, or can no longer continue. Joran exhaled slowly. Great. No pressure. Ryzen smirked. I will make this quick, human. Joran rolled his shoulders. Let's see you try. The elder raised his hand, then dropped it. The duel began. Ryzen moved fast, faster than any human should be able to. Joran barely dodged the first strike, rolling to the side as the Arvani's fist slammed into the ground where he had just been standing. Dust flew up from the impact. Shit, Joran muttered. Ryzen smirked. Weak. Joran didn't waste time talking. He darted in, throwing a punch at Ryzen's ribs. It connected, but it was like hitting solid metal. Ryzen barely flinched before he grabbed Joran by the arm and flung him across the arena. Joran hit the ground hard, the breath knocked out of him. Joran. Celia's voice rang out, full of fear. Joran groaned, rolling onto his hands and knees. His muscles ached, but he wasn't about to give up. Not when she was watching. Not when this fight was for her. He pushed himself up and cracked his neck. That all you got? Ryzen's smirk faltered slightly. You should stay down. Yeah? Not my style. Joran rushed forward, ducking under Ryzen's neck swing. This time, Instead of aiming for a punch, he grabbed onto Ryzen's arm and used the Arvani's momentum against him. With a sharp twist, he sent Ryzen stumbling forward. The crowd murmured in surprise. Joran grinned. So, they didn't expect me to last this long? Ryzen turned, his expression dark. Enough games. He came at Joran hard. The next few hits were brutal. Joran barely dodged some, but others landed. One to his ribs, another to his shoulder. Pain flared through his body. Still, he refused to go down. Ryzen grabbed him, lifting him slightly off the ground. This is over, Ryzen growled. Joran gritted his teeth.
Not yet.
Summoning all his strength, he slammed his forehead into Ryzen's face. The Arvani staggered back, caught off guard. Joran didn't give him a chance to recover. He drove forward, tackling Ryzen to the ground. They hit the arena floor hard, and Joran quickly locked his arm around Ryzen's throat. Ryzen struggled, his muscles tensing, but Joran held on. The crowd was silent. Yield, Joran growled, tightening his grip. Ryzen's breath came in short, angry bursts. His pride was fighting against his body's limits. Seconds passed. Then, Ryzen's fist hit the ground twice in surrender. Joran released him and rolled away, chest heaving. The elder stepped forward. The duel is over. He turned to Ryzen. You have yielded. Ryzen sat up, eyes burning with frustration, but he didn't argue. The elder then faced Joran. By right of victory, the bond stands. None may challenge it again. Joran let out a breath of relief. His entire body ached, but he had won. He turned to Celia. She was already running toward him. Before he could react, she dropped to her knees and threw her arms around him, holding him tightly. You won, she whispered, her voice shaking. Joran chuckled, resting his forehead against hers.
Yeah.
Guess I did. And when she pulled back, her violet eyes filled with something soft and warm, Joran realized this was never just about winning.
This was about them.
Joran's entire body ached, but as Celia held onto him, he barely noticed the pain. The duel was over. The bond was his. The Arvani crowd remained silent, their glowing eyes watching with unreadable expressions. Ryzen had already stood, his face still twisted with frustration. But he did not speak. The law was the law. He had lost. The elder stepped forward. The challenge has been answered. The bond is sealed. No one may dispute it. Joran glanced at Celia. Her violet eyes shimmered with something unreadable. Relief. Maybe even awe. He hadn't realized how much she had been holding back until now. She turned to Ryzen. It is over. Ryzen clenched his jaw, but finally exhaled. I only wanted what was promised. Celia shook her head. I was never a promise. I am a person. Ryzen looked away, shame flickering in his expression. Then, without another word, he turned and walked out of the arena. Joran let out a slow breath. Well, that was fun. Let's never do it again. Celia surprised him by laughing softly. Agreed. Back at Joran's apartment, he sat on the couch while Celia carefully wrapped his bruised ribs with cooling gel. The Arvani had advanced medical treatments, and whatever she was using felt like ice and fire at the same time. You fought well, she murmured, her fingers lingering against his skin. Joran smirked, wincing slightly. I fought stubbornly. She met his gaze, her expression soft. For me, his smirk faded.
Yeah.
For you? Silence stretched between them. It wasn't awkward. It was heavy with something unspoken. Something undeniable. Celia finally broke it. Joran, I need to ask, why did you fight? He frowned. What do you mean? She swallowed. At first, you did not want this bond. You tried to reject it. But tonight, you fought for it. For me? Joran held her gaze, his heartbeat unsteady. He could lie, brush it off, make a joke. But he didn't want to. Not with her. So he told her the truth. Because I care about you, Celia, he admitted. At first, this whole thing was just some crazy accident. But then, I got to know you, and somewhere along the way, it stopped feeling like something forced on me. He exhaled. It felt like something I wanted. Celia's breath hitched. Then, slowly, she reached up and cupped his face. Her touch was cool, but her eyes burned with warmth. In our Vani culture, she whispered, a bond is sacred. It is not just about fate. It is about choice. Her thumb brushed his cheek. And you chose me. Joran's fingers found her hand, holding it against his face.
Yeah.
I did. Celia leaned in, her lips inches from his. Then let this be our true beginning. And when she kissed him, it wasn't the result of an accident or tradition or fate. It was theirs. Days turned into weeks, and the bond between them only grew stronger. Celia no longer saw herself as an outsider in Joran's world. She was part of it now.
And Joran?
He had stopped thinking of their bond as something that had trapped him. It had saved him. One evening, as they sat on the balcony watching the city lights, Joran took her hand and laced their fingers together. So, what happens now? Celia smiled, resting her head against his shoulder.
Now?
We build a life. Together. Joran squeezed her hand.
Yeah.
That sounded just fine to him. And as the stars shone above them, two souls, one human, one Arvani, began a journey that was never meant to happen, but was always meant to be.